A desperate single father, Michael, struggles to get medical attention for his gravely ill daughter, only to be coldly dismissed by a heartless doctor. Just when all hope seems lost, a powerful figure unexpectedly arrives at the hospital, and everything changes in an instant. As the situation unfolds, long-buried secrets come to light, leading to a dramatic twist no one saw coming. The shocking revelation not only saves the child but exposes deep flaws within the hospital. What happens next will leave you breathless, as justice is finally served. But before we dive in, leave a comment and let us know where you are watching from today. And if this story speaks to you, hit that subscribe button for more amazing stories. In the crowded waiting room of St. Augustine's Hospital, Michael Sanders sat anxiously, his 5-year-old daughter, Lily, resting limply in his arms. The pale, sickly child had been coughing non-stop, and her fever was raging. Michael, a single dad juggling multiple jobs, was beyond stressed. With no mother to help, every ounce of Lily's care fell on him. He had rushed her to the hospital after a night of worsening symptoms, but the response he received was anything but helpful. Dr. Evan Wallace, one of the hospital's senior physicians, barely glanced in Michael's direction as he walked past them in the waiting room. With his neatly pressed white coat, expensive wristwatch, and the air of someone far too busy to care about anyone else, Dr. Wallace exuded arrogance. Michael, who was dressed in his usual work attire, a plain t-shirt and worn-out jeans, stood up immediately. "Doctor, please, my daughter is very sick. She needs help." His voice trembled with desperation as he tried to get the doctor's attention. Dr. Wallace looked over his shoulder and scowled. "You'll need to wait your turn like everyone else," he said coldly, his eyes scanning Michael up and down with thinly veiled disdain. "The ER is busy, and we prioritize serious cases. She's burning up, and she can barely breathe," Michael pleaded, his voice breaking with fear. But Dr. Wallace, not wanting to be bothered by what he perceived as another charity case, simply rolled his eyes. "If you can't afford to pay for immediate care, then you'll just have to wait. We have a protocol here, and your turn will come when it comes." Michael's heart sank. He wasn't a rich man, and he didn't have insurance. He worked as a mechanic, struggling to make ends meet for himself and Lily. The way Dr. Wallace dismissed him made him feel small, insignificant, like his daughter's life wasn't worth as much because they didn't have the means to pay up front. Feeling helpless, Michael sat back down, cradling his feverish daughter as she moaned softly in his arms. His mind raced with worry and anger. How could a doctor, someone meant to save lives, be so callous? All he could do was pray that Lily would hold on long enough to get the help she needed. Hours passed. Patients with seemingly minor issues were called in before them. Every time the door opened and a nurse or doctor stepped into the waiting room, Michael's hope would rise, only to be dashed again when their names weren't called. Lily's breathing grew more labored, her little body shaking with chills. Michael couldn't take it anymore. He stood up and marched back to the nurse's station, desperation etched into every line of his face. "Please, someone has to help my daughter now. She can't wait any longer." The nurse behind the desk looked up, somewhat sympathetically, but shook her head. "I'm sorry, sir. We're doing our best, but we're short-staffed tonight. Dr. Wallace is the attending physician, and he makes the calls on patient priority." Michael clenched his fists, feeling the weight of hopelessness suffocating him. He had done everything right, rushed Lily to the hospital, waited for hours, but it seemed like no one cared. He looked around the busy ER, where nurses rushed from one room to another, and doctors scribbled notes on clipboards. His daughter was fading in his arms, and no one seemed to notice. Just as Michael was about to lose hope entirely, the double doors at the entrance to the ER swung open, and a man in an impeccable suit stepped in. His presence commanded attention, and the staff immediately straightened up as they noticed who it was. It was none other than Thomas Weston, the owner of the hospital and one of the wealthiest men in the city. His reputation as a philanthropist and business magnate preceded him, but few knew much about his personal life, least of all that he had a beloved granddaughter. As Weston made his way through the ER, his sharp eyes scanned the room until they landed on Michael and the limp child in his arms. Something about the scene made him pause. He approached them quickly. "What seems to be the problem here?" Weston asked, his voice deep and authoritative. Michael, not recognizing who Weston was, replied in a shaky voice, "My daughter. She's very sick, and no one is helping us. We've been waiting for hours. Weston glanced at Lily, immediately seeing the severity of the situation. He turned sharply to the nearby nurse and demanded, "Why hasn't this child been seen yet?" The nurse hesitated, glancing nervously toward Dr. Wallace's office. "Dr. Wallace, he's prioritizing other cases right now." Weston's face darkened. He wasn't the type to tolerate negligence, especially not in his hospital. Without another word, he strode toward Wallace's office and flung the door open. Dr. Wallace looked up, startled. "Mr. Weston, I wasn't expecting you. Is there something I can help you with?" "There's a critically ill child in the waiting room that you've chosen to ignore," Weston said coldly. "Why?" Wallace stammered, clearly flustered. I didn't realize." "You didn't realize?" Weston's voice was sharp. "Or did you not care because her father couldn't pay?" Wallace paled, suddenly realizing the gravity of the situation. I thought there were more pressing cases." Weston's eyes flashed with anger. "That little girl is my granddaughter. And you," he jabbed a finger toward Wallace, "are done here." Wallace's face turned ashen. He opened his mouth to protest, but the words died in his throat. Weston didn't wait for an explanation. He stormed out of the office, calling for a pediatric specialist to see Lily immediately. Back in the waiting room, Michael watched, stunned, as everything unfolded. He hadn't known who Weston was, but now, as nurses and doctors scrambled to assist Lily, it became clear. Within minutes, Lily was whisked away to receive the care she so desperately needed. Michael, still in shock, was approached by Weston. "Thank you, sir," Michael said, choking back tears. "I didn't know she was your granddaughter. I was just trying to get her help." Weston placed a firm hand on Michael's shoulder. "You don't have to thank me. Any child in need deserves immediate attention, no matter their financial situation." His voice softened. "I'm just sorry it took me coming here to make that happen." Michael nodded, his heart full of gratitude but also disbelief at the incredible twist of fate that had brought them help in their darkest moment. He had never imagined that the man who owned the hospital, someone so wealthy and powerful, would step in and save his daughter. Days later, as Lily recovered, Michael received an unexpected offer. Thomas Weston, deeply moved by the ordeal, offered to cover Lily's medical expenses and even set up a fund for her future. More than that, Weston personally oversaw changes in the hospital's policies to ensure that no family, regardless of financial status, would ever be ignored again. Dr. Wallace, meanwhile, was promptly fired, and a new culture of compassion began to spread through St. Augustine's Hospital. In the end, it wasn't just about money or power. It was about doing the right thing, something that should never be determined by the size of someone's wallet. Michael walked out of the hospital a different man, with Lily's hand in his, feeling like, for the first time in a long while, there was hope for a better future.